So, Patricia, why don't we get us started?
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. So as Elena mentioned, we'll do a quick book recap and then leave about 30 minutes for breakout group exercises because there's nothing like doing to reinforce the learning. So first question, why be a likable badass? You're here, so you probably do, but the reason behind it, and certainly the reason for me, is that we all want respect. And resources and power tend to follow respect. Status fundamentally comes down to the way others see you, how much you're respected, admired, and valued. And the key to high status and respect, especially for women, is to get others to see you as an assertive and warm person. Dudes may be able to get away with it's better to be feared
Sure,
than liked.
let's do it.
Dudes may be able to get away with better to be feared than liked. Women, it's better to be a likable badass. So it's not fair. By the way, that's not fair. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying it is what it is. And so we work with reality. So social psychology, and Alison Fragale is a social psychology researcher. The research suggests that our perceptions, our and others' perceptions of people, are organized around two fundamental dimensions: warm versus cold, and assertive versus submissive. On the warm cold axis, or likableness, that's about trying to figure out, we're trying to figure out how another person is going to treat us. Will they care about us? Will they help us? Will they be pleasant? On assertiveness and submissiveness, that's about assessing how capable other people are. Will they work hard? Will they avoid mistakes? Will their work be good? Now, something that kind of bothered me when I was first reading this is that assertiveness and competence are conflated. I actually wrote in my notes, oh, surely she doesn't just mean assertiveness, she means assertiveness and competence. And then as I read more, that's just what shows up in the research. And if I'm honest, it's what happens in real life too. People who are assertive are assumed to be not just more confident, but also more effective than those who are tentative. Again, is it how it should be? Probably not, but it is what it is, and we work with reality. So clearly, the place to be is to be both assertive and warm. The person whose reputation here is perceived as being both caring and capable. And this is the quadrant that accrues the highest status. So, how do we get here? I'll talk you through a few key principles from the book, and as well as some key techniques. And then Elena, Dr. Krasnoporova, PhD from Stanford, by the way, will share a broader menu of options to dial up, respectively, warmth and assertiveness.
Patricia, before we go on to the next slide,
Yeah.
can I just make a couple of comments about just how much I hate the adjectives that are listed next to cold, or the opposite of warmth? Because it's like, if you take this very literally, you are a mean person, you're cruel, you're ruthless. That's very, very harsh in terms of the judgments. To me, the opposite of warmth is not necessarily this kind of meanness, coldness is just absence of warmth, right? Being difficult to relate to, as an example, or unapproachable, or whatever, is not warm enough, right? Like this veers into pretty extreme territory. Same thing on the submissive thing, like lazy and meek. It just sounds very, very, very harsh. So I think I take issue with the phrasing of some of these words, but the spirit of assertive and warmth and the desire to be those things, I'm all for. Just in my opinion, the opposites are a little too harsh.
Yeah. And Stacy, your note in the comments that you're surprised that direct isn't in the cold area. That's actually a really important point in the book, that these two are orthogonal. That in fact we do have one is not assertive is not the opposite of warm, and that we can be both done right. And especially as women, perhaps first and foremost, we need to be aware that we need to manage our perceptions, our status, as a matter of urgency and playing offense, not defense. There is a natural tendency in the world, unfortunately, that we as women will be perceived, people will have preconceived notions of us as being lower status. And those get reinforced by delightful confirmation bias, where people notice the things that fit with their perceptions and ignore the things that don't, all things being equal. And as a result, it's on us to get out in front and put forward our likableness and our badassness. Second, and this goes to that question of, are they opposed? Certainly, the research that Professor Fragale has done says that absolutely they are not. That the key here is to add, not subtract. So if one is too much of one than the other, it's better to add in the other because it is a complement. They can be complementary. And by doing so, you leverage your strength and you add an additional strength that makes the package higher status and more appealing. And one of my favorite points in the book is that we need to be true to ourselves. So there are many ways to be warm and many ways to be assertive. And Elena will talk through a number of those. But the nice thing is, you don't have to be all of them. You find the tactics that work for you, that are true to you. So, for example, in the book, Fragale recognizes that her natural, shall we say, resting bitch face probably doesn't help her. But as much as she writes that, she tried to learn to
What's funny
smile.
about that is like,
Oh, Rachel, you might want to mute
oh,
yourself.
sorry, I thought I was on mute.
Um, you, many of us were born with a natural, let's say, a thinking look that is closer to grimacing than smiling. And it doesn't serve us. And some of us have been able to modify it, and others don't. Fragale says that she hasn't, and she's given it up. The picture of the woman shown here is an ultramarathon runner, Robin Arzon, who at the time she ran her first ultramarathon was a recovering attorney and decided to run it in her signature bright lipstick, winged eyeliner, and gold jewelry. And that served her very well in her transition to a new career as author and fitness influencer. Yeah, for me, is that how I'm going to transition into my next career, by being visible and highly memorable? Abso-frickin-lutely not. I might be able to wear lipstick once or twice a year. That's about it. So we find the things that work for us. Yes. And she is a very well-known rock star Peloton instructor, in addition to her writing. Okay, so we're doing is better than saying. At least I think a lot of us were raised with that. But we also have to tell our story, because people won't always recognize, we won't get a reputation unless our story is told. Not everyone can see what we do. So first and foremost, tell your story. If we don't tell our own story, no one will. And I know for me, this has been historically quite challenging. The idea of self-promotion feels icky. It feels like something, oh, I shouldn't do that. That's wrong. Fragale emphasizes, and I am coming to believe, that I just need to set that aside. This is not the way to go. And interestingly, important, busy people are particularly worth telling our story to, talking ourselves up to, because A, they're often the most important, and B, they're the least likely to remember the source. They'll just remember the message, not where it came from. She has a really gnarly story about a guy she worked for who was an absolute schmuck, but everybody thought he walked on water. And it turned out it was because He was spreading the story that he walked on water. And it was brilliant. Well, it's terrible, but it worked for him. Also, asserting a way that we can assert ourselves and not feel blowback is to both assert ourselves and show we care in the same communication. I'll talk about this a bit more in just a moment as the Stacey Abrams technique. Um, I won't go through all of this, but the other piece is to recruit an army of promoters. This is efficient, this is effective. Each of us can only talk to so many people, but if we get known widely, if we're, let's say, memorable for our bright lipstick and our gold earrings while running a marathon, more people will remember us and help us spread the word. Elena will talk a bit about also building ways to build favor widely, to put in small deposits that get us seen in the way we want and get people thinking positively about us and wanting to help spread the message. But you know what? How do you get people to spread your message? You spread their message, you promote them, you talk about them on LinkedIn, you talk about them behind very positively behind their backs, and you ask. You say, hey, I know you know such and so. Please share your good opinion. Just ask. What's the worst that can happen? Say no. Okay. Stacey Abrams technique, and this will be the last before I hand over to Elena. But I loved this idea in the book, which is when you're given an opportunity to talk about yourself, to share your accomplishments or ambition, go for it. And especially if you're worried that it'll be seen as too crass or perceived negatively, you add to it a statement of caring or a statement that shows why you're doing it, that you're doing it is at least in part to benefit others, because that dials up the warmth. And the origin story of this is Stacey Abrams being asked on CBS, so do you aspire to be president? And as many of us know, especially women of color, there is a danger in a question like that of being seen as too grasping. And so her answer, but of course she wants to be president. She's a politician. She's putting herself out there. And what is the highest office in the land? So she answers, absolutely. And she she adds to that why she's doing it, that she sees herself as having responsibility, not just to herself, but for others, for every young woman, every person of color, every young person of color who sees her and decides what they're capable of, she needs to say yes. So the altruism, the warmth, and I don't seek to be president. I will never answer that question that way. But if ever I have the opportunity to talk about some award I got, I'll talk about how it's good for the company as well, which is not just beneficial, it's usually also true. So with that, I'll hand over to Elena for a discussion of the many ways to express assertiveness and warmth.
Yes, indeed. So we're going to get tactical here. And I'm going to give some examples from the book of ways of manifesting your assertiveness. Then there's going to be a section on warmth, and then putting it all together, specific and really cool techniques for how to be a likable badass. So both warm and assertive. So let's start with assertiveness. And the first three bullet points have to do with talking. And I am definitely checking all of these boxes. I talk fast. I'm very quick to jump in a conversation and respond to a question or jumping after a break or a pause. And I just talk a lot and I take up airtime. And it's one of the ways in which you can be assertive. Another one has to do with eye contact. Making and sustaining eye contact is seen as assertive. Incidentally, it's also a signal of warmth, so it helps on both dimensions. Another one, kind of a nonverbal cue in a meeting, let's say, is taking a seat at the head of the table. That's a very assertive move, right? Another one, it was mentioned in the chat, is having a very direct communication style where you don't mince words, you just go for it, you say exactly what you think, which is what I did when I criticized the author's, words used to describe the not warm or not assertive people. Another one, again, guilty as charged, is offering advice and sharing your perspective and wisdom. Similar vein is expressing your opinions, speaking up in meetings, and being very task focused and sort of agenda oriented in meetings, as opposed to spending time on chit chat. Here's the more spicy and interesting ones, maybe a little more subtle. One is not apologizing for insignificant or imagined failures. So I'm not saying never saying sorry. If you really messed up, you should take responsibility and you should apologize. But we say sorry like a lot for things that just don't require an apology, and it subtracts from our badassery, from our assertiveness. So don't do that. Another one is not hiding your accomplishments because you're humble, you're modest, etc. Get over it. If you want to be perceived as a badass and as an assertive person, don't hide them. And Patricia talked about it in her section. It's about self-promoting to busy, powerful people. Powerful because they have the power, right, to grant you the status that you're seeking, and busy because, as she mentioned, they'll probably forget where the source of the information about you being amazing comes from and just remember that you're amazing.
Funnily enough, this played out in real life with a post I put on LinkedIn about this talk, where my husband heard from one of his former colleagues, "Hey, I hear Patricia's quite a badass." Yes, that's right.
Absolutely. And a likable one at that. All right, so the next point that I love is humor, and specifically not of the self-deprecating variety. So Alison Fragale, the author, claims that she has the resting bitch face, but I've met her in real life. I went to her talk, and the woman actually does smile quite a bit, and she is hilariously funny, like comedian level funny. But her go-to type of humor is of the self-deprecating variety, which actually has the negative effect of subtracting from your credibility and from your assertiveness, especially with people who don't know you. And she was joking, because there were a lot of jokes in that talk and in the book as well, but she was joking she's probably the only author on the planet whose dedication page was rejected by her editor for being too self-deprecating. And the editor went on to say and point out all of the pages on which she was being too self-deprecating, too humble, which is not appropriate for readers who don't know her, right? She needs to establish her credibility, her authority on the subject. And so, and the editor was like, you are too self-deprecating on page 23, 47, 121, etc. She was super, super specific. The last point on this page is swearing. It's not for everyone. But I certainly do it a lot. It comes naturally to me. And Alison, the author, also talks about it, especially as a way to bond with men who then feel comfortable in that setting. But again, the point of having a lot of these bullet points, and I'm sure we'll generate a lot more when we go into breakout sessions and talk about our own experiences and our own styles, is that you can pick the many, many different things that feel authentic to you, that feel natural to you. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to. All right, next slide. Let's talk about examples of warmth. So smiling definitely helps. Again, Alison made fun of this woman, who smiles all the time, as opposed to her allegedly resting bitch face, which I swear I don't know what she's talking about. But the examples of the resting bitch face that she was talking about is like, people are constantly asking her what's wrong when she's just thinking, because she has this sort of the frowning, processing, please wait, kind of face. All right, the next one is humor, which also helps. And here you can be self-deprecating if you want to, especially again with people who know you really well. It can soften, especially the assertive and direct side of things. I mentioned eye contact before as an assertiveness signal. It's also a signal of warmth. Another signal of warmth is offering help and greeting people in a very friendly kind of way, doing warm chit chat, for instance, at the beginning of the meeting before jumping into the agenda. So again, you can be both warm by doing, the warm, personable kind of chit chat, and then being very task oriented and very, very organized and very direct in the rest of the meeting. Just more broadly, showing interest in the other person as a human being is definitely a signal of warmth. And finally, building rapport through finding similarities.
It's amazing how powerful this is. She describes similarities as the single most powerful weapon in the social psychology of building liking, and it's true. If you notice that the other person has a dog and you have a dog, you talk about the dog. If you notice that they've got kids the same age, you work that in. And I definitely find myself falling for this in a big way. It just makes the other person seem more human, more kind.
For sure. All right, let's go through a couple of likable badass strategies that are both warm and assertive. So being proactive at offering help is great at warmth, but being proactive at offering the right kind of help, the kind of help that will get you noticed and valued. So for instance, the example in the book is helping with PowerPoint presentations or Google Slides or whatever, Keynote, slides. Before you know it, you're going to be making those presentations for the CEO, right? It's the kind of stuff that can get you noticed. Another
While also
example
being
is sending
strategic.
out, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
While also being strategic, because you don't want this to get into that pitfall where you're the party planner all the time, as
Right.
happens a little too much to women.
Yep. Sending out shout out emails to recognize the good work of others, hosting meetings to showcase their work, posting on social media where you do clearly come across as a very accomplished person, but you reframe your accomplishments as lessons learned, mentorship for others. Another very cool example in the book was using out of office messages strategically to highlight your accomplishments, like crushing it at the blah blah conference, right? Maybe not literally using that word, but why not? That's assertive. Another good example was humor bragging as opposed to humble bragging. Like, I was on TV this morning. The makeup artist made me look so good, I offered to tattoo her name on my arm. So, of course, you snuck in the fact that you were on TV this morning, but you do it in a way that is both likable and assertive. Accepting compliments with grace. Sometimes they can be challenging for many of us. And then Allison's favorite tactic is actually making 2 email introductions for each person that she meets as a follow-up to a meeting. All right, another quick set of strategies before we go into breakouts. Combining self-promotion with other promotion. Patricia mentioned that in her section. As an example, brag and thank strategy is a good one where there's an accomplishment. Let's say you moderated a big panel at a conference, right? It may otherwise go unnoticed, but by acknowledging the panelists who were there with you and offering thanks to them, you are both bragging in a non-braggy kind of way, and of course, thanking and acknowledging others. Patricia talked about how important it is to strategically volunteer for the right things, not just be volunteering for getting coffee. So some of the examples of the strategic volunteering are interviewing a powerful person on the stage or moderating a panel, organizing your own event, and then inviting powerful people to present and participate. Sharing things with others, commenting on people's social media posts. The important thing there is to be genuine, thoughtful, and please do not use AI suggestions because they're so cringy. And then mentoring people on various topics, including how to be a likable badass, which is what Patricia and I are doing right now. All right, now we're going to go into breakouts. And so here is the plan. We're going to go into 2 groups. So Patricia will be in one and I'll be in the other. And it's a mix of women who self-identified as warm, assertive, or both, or not sure. We're going to stay in the same group for 30 minutes. And we're going to first discuss assertiveness for the first 15 minutes, and then we're going to switch and discuss warmth. And the point is to learn from women who lead from different strengths from our own natural strengths. So if you are naturally an assertive person, and we're discussing assertiveness, we would love to invite you to share your favorite go-to strategy, which may be one of the strategies that we already mentioned so far, or maybe something unique to you. and then briefly describe the situation where it works well. And we'll just, kind of hopefully have a bunch of people share a bunch of strategies. And then, like I said, we'll start with assertiveness first and then switch over to warmth. Any questions before we get put into breakout sessions? All right, Patricia, do your magic.